All right, why don't we get started? All right, how's everyone doing today? Good? Good conference? You're seeing cool stuff that at least has piqued your interest, I hope, if not more? All right. And by the way, how many people showed up purely just to see if there was another funny T-shirt? No? No? That's right. I already got that a couple times. They were like, where's the T-shirt? I'm like, oh. Only on the big stage do they let us do that. All right. So, hi, my name's John Sheehan. I'm an architect on Windows. I work on the application experience team. I focus mainly on app model and some of the stuff that Alesh and I covered yesterday. I've worked at Microsoft for, I guess, a little over 5 years. I came to Microsoft through an acquisition from a company called Softricity. I was the chief architect there on a product called SoftGrid. How many people have heard of SoftGrid? Impressive. I like this audience. I actually had someone come up to me last night after when you got your machines and was saying, well, in Windows 8, are you going to be able to run any apps securely on a desktop? And I said, no, we're talking about Metro apps. And he said, you have this AppV technology. And he started telling me about AppV and explaining what it did. And I had to say, yeah, I have actually worked a little bit with that product in the past. I was actually the architect for AppV for about the first 3.5 years that I was at Microsoft. And so I think I worked in that technology for, I think, almost a decade. Getting acquired by Microsoft was really cool because I got to come into Microsoft with this really, really great technology and just got to go all over the company trying to find out who wanted to use it and what we could use it for. Spoke to a whole bunch of different teams and eventually ended up talking with the Office team. And we did the Click-to-Run product. I don't know how many of you know what Click-to-Run is. Anyone? See, now only a couple of people. If you've bought a laptop in the last couple of years, you have AppV on your machine. And if you've ever used Starter Edition or if you've ever gone up to the web to get Office, you've been using it. I think I've been in the industry probably a little over 15 years. I got started doing stuff like in automotive, building vision systems and hardware and doing ladder logic and got to do some fun stuff like that. I've started a couple of companies, done a few other things. Had a pretty fun career so far, and I think I can safely say that I'm having more fun now than I have ever had. So, all right. So today we're going to talk about how you can use Windows 8 to create a continuous experience for your customers when they're using your app. And so one thing that happened was when I was outside the door, a few different people came up to me and sort of said, what's this talk about? Like, and everyone had a different guess at what it was. So I guess people don't actually read the little blurb underneath. They just read the title. So let me give you an example of what I mean when I say a continuous experience. So let's say that me and a whole bunch of my friends want to go out for dinner. And since this is hypothetical, we can all pretend that I have a whole bunch of friends. And let's say that you just built the next great restaurant guide application. So I go up in the store, I look around, I find your app, I download it, and I start using it. And I go in and I'm using search and I'm doing all these great things, and I narrow down to a few restaurants that are in my area, that are the right cuisine, the right price range, and maybe I go and look at maps to see where they're located. And eventually I'll probably narrow it down to a handful of restaurants. And then I'm going to go off and talk with my friends, maybe exchange emails, maybe go to my favorite social networking site and communicate some other way. We'll probably narrow it down. We'll probably say, hey, Mario's. Mario sounds like a great restaurant. Let's go eat at Mario's. I'll come back to your app, pick Mario's, maybe get to the address and go off and get directions, whatever. And then I'll go home from work. It'll be time for me to go out to eat. So I'll grab my tablet PC, go out the door, come back into your app. There's Mario's, just where it was when I was on my work PC. right there, right where the experience is consistent, right where I left it. I can get directions, drive in the car, kind of go like this and hopefully not crash. Go and eat dinner. After dinner, I'll go back home. I'll probably sit down at my home PC. Maybe I'll want to leave a review. So I come back in your app again. There's Mario still. I can leave a review, do whatever. So that's what I'm talking about when I say a consistent experience. People have lots of PCs these days, and your application there's a great opportunity for you to provide an experience that really people are not used to, but would really appreciate if they could. So when we started looking at Windows 8, we looked at how developers wrote applications, how they dealt with their data, how they provided sort of what we call a continuous experience on one PC, how they did all this. And I'll give you an example of a continuous experience on a single PC that you're so used to today you wouldn't even think about it. Every time I get a new PC, one of the first things I do is I install Office. It just has a whole bunch of stuff that I always use. And I'll launch Outlook, and I immediately have to go in. I have to set up my Exchange account. I have to go in. I have to set up my standard signature. I have to make sure that on the left I get the folder pane just like I like it. I make sure that the reading pane's on the right. Go and make a couple of other tweaks, right? I do that once per installation, per PC. But then that's it. Every time I launch Outlook, no matter if I reboot or I come back to it, whatever, it's always mine. It looks just like I like it. And if it didn't, that would just be bizarre for me. But there's this expectation that when I go to another machine, get a new PC, obviously I have to start all over. The way that people do that today, or the way that developers provide experience, is by using all these cool features of Windows that we've had for years. They use the registry. They use the file system. In the file system, there's all kinds of different locations. There's the application data folder. There's subfolders under there. So there's lots of different choices. And you as a developer, we just kind of leave it up to you. You have to go and choose where you're going to store stuff. You have to create the folders or registry keys. You have to make sure you name them so that they're not too generic, they don't collide. You have to make sure that when you want to install, you always clean that up, right? Always. At least you hope you do, and users hope you do, but sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But that's the kind of stuff that you can use today in Windows to give users a nice, consistent experience or continuous experience on one PC. What about a lot of PCs, though? I mean, today, people tend to have, lots of people have more than one PC. And some people have work PCs, they have home PCs, they have laptops, they're starting to get tablets. What happens for that? I'm sure the cloud somehow is going to help this, right? I mean, to the cloud. Somehow or other, I'm sure there's a way you can leverage the cloud to take the existing apps that you have right now and do whatever it takes and give this kind of continuous experience for your desktop apps. I'm sure you could do that. But what would it take? Well, you'd have to register a domain. You'd have to get some kind of presence in the cloud, which includes some, server power, some storage. You'll have to come up with some kind of user management system, right? The user's going to have to pick a username, a password. You'll have to build a system. What happens if they forget their password? You will have remembered to ask them a bunch of questions like their mother's maiden name. You have to build an entire sync infrastructure, which doesn't sound that hard until you think about all the different things you'd have to do to successfully sync this data. Because there's network connectivity changes. Like when the user makes a change to the data, they may not be connected. By the time they are connected, they may not be using your app. So maybe you'll build an NT service that always runs and just tries to make sure that the data always gets synced. Depending upon how much data there is, you'll have to worry about things like what happens if they're on a costed network, right? If they're on 3G and they're paying for the bytes, they may not want that data to roam just then. And so you'll probably have to give them some kind of control over deciding if they want it to roam or not. And then you'll have to give them some kind of user experience around deciding, yes, I want it to roam, no, I don't want it to roam. And then if you're lucky, you'll be successful. So then you'll have to scale, right? You'll have to have more servers, and you'll have to be able to make sure that it can scale out. Those servers will cost you money. The bandwidth will cost you money. It's non-trivial. And let's remember, all you really wanted to do was you wanted to build the next great restaurant guide. So it seems like probably more than you're willing to bite off. So that's your option right now. You could do that. Or in Windows 8, you can write one line of code. No, feel free to applaud, seriously. That's pretty cool. And you have no idea how much work went into getting it down to one line of code. So yes, please applaud. So what you're looking at here is we have this new thing called application data. And it's the place that you go whenever you need to store data that's specific to your application. And I'll get into the details of it later. But here, all we're saying is that part of the application data namespace is the roaming section, and particularly, in this case, roaming settings. And all we're saying is, I have a value called restaurant, or we could have called it current restaurant or whatever, but current restaurant made it wrap to 2 lines on the slide, which didn't look as cool, so we're going to call it restaurant. And save it as Mario's or restaurant ID or whatever it is. But you have that one line of code, that's it. Windows 8 will take care of the rest. And today we're going to talk about, first of all, how this works. We're going to talk about making some decisions around what you should roam, what you shouldn't, that kind of stuff. So if we go back to the beginning, when I said that people have this expectation around a continuous experience on one PC. In Windows 8, it is something you actually have to think about differently than you did before. And if you went to Ben Schrower's talk this morning, you would have heard a lot of the details about suspension, app lifecycle, termination. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but in the context of app data. And then obviously we're going to spend a bunch of time on talking about switching between PCs, that kind of stuff. And when you're done, I hope you leave here with at least enough understanding to think about your code and think about how you can build these really cool experiences for your customers, and hopefully maybe get a couple cool ideas. So, start from the beginning. In Windows, there's this object here. It's windows.storage.application-data. And so you've probably seen enough of WinRT now to know that Windows is the namespace where all the WinRT objects live. And under there, we have the storage namespaces, where we put stuff like file APIs, and we put this app data stuff. And, excuse me, sorry. Allergies are kind of bothering me down here in Anaheim. And so in application data, there are really 2 kinds of pieces of information that we deal with. We deal with settings, and we deal with files. And settings are, small amounts of data. They're preferences. They're typically things that the user has either explicitly or implicitly configured. So when we talked before about, I like my reading pane on the right. Like, that's a preference. That's something you should store in settings. It's name-value pairs, and it is hierarchical. So you can create subcontainers and create groups of settings. We'll talk a little bit more about them in a while. And then the other thing we have is files. And so basically, when your application gets installed on Windows 8, we go off and create a whole bunch of stuff for you. We create a roaming directory for you. We create a local directory for you. We create a temp directory for you. We create a roaming settings container and a local settings container for you. So we create all these things so that when your app starts running, it knows that they're there. It didn't have to do anything. We pick a special place in the file system to store these things, It's protected from other app containers and other applications, so they can't get at your data, you can't get at their data. And probably one of the really important or most important things is if a user ever does decide to uninstall your app, we'll clean it up on that system. So nothing's left behind. The user system is clean. And so over time, users will get more and more confident at trying apps. And so they won't think that, oh, I don't want to try too many apps, or maybe, who knows what will happen. They'll get really confident with it. And if you have your great restaurant guide, you're much more likely to get people to try it. And then now it's up to you to write good code and great experiences so that people keep your apps and give you money. I keep saying app data. Right? Why do I keep prefacing it? I'm not just saying data. And the reason I'm not is because there's really two kinds of data that when we think about data in Windows 8, we think about two different kinds of data. There's app data and there's user data. User data is that high-value information that users generate that really goes beyond the bounds of your app. Right? So like, let's say you built if you saw the keynote yesterday, let's say you built that camera app that Alesh and I built yesterday. And I used it to take pictures of my daughter and my dog, and then I put them up on screen. But that little doggy's about 4 pounds. He's about that big, pretty cute. So I had these pictures, and I love those pictures. I really do. Imagine how frustrated and upset I would be if I uninstalled the camera app and then I lost them all. Right? That's not the app's data. That's my data. That's my personal information. And so when we look at user data, we think of things like documents and pictures and videos and music. And that's really the kind of stuff that your app shouldn't be storing in these app data areas that are going to get uninstalled, typically. There are cases where actually you would store pictures there, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But in general, if this is the main copy of the user's data, then you shouldn't be storing it here. We actually have libraries for this kind of information for user data, and I believe there's a talk sometime, I think tomorrow, or actually maybe it's today, on the file APIs in the libraries. But when I say app data, this is the kind of data that, as long as the user's using your app, it's very valuable to them. It could be settings. It could just be maybe you've cached some data locally so that every time I use your app, there's always something there, even if I'm not connected to the network. Like if you built a social networking app, and I launched it, and I saw all the latest updates and feeds, and then I went away from the app, and in the meantime, I lost network connectivity. If I come back, well, it's at least nice to be able to see the feeds that I had the last time I was using the app, even if I can't get the most up-to-date ones at that moment. And so every time your application is going to store data, just give this a thought and decide, is this data really tied to my app, or is it really something that really belongs in the user locations? And then once you start thinking about data, and once you get past the user data, and you decide that you really are talking about app data, there's really two types that we look at. There's local and there's roaming. I think the names are pretty self-explanatory, but let me just talk a little bit about each one just to give you a feel for how we think about it. The local locations are where you would store, like for example, local files is where you would store things like caches, like I just mentioned. You might have other kinds of temporary data, stuff that could be regenerated, right? So maybe there's a golden copy in the cloud, but you want a local copy. Maybe you're just doing it for performance reasons because you want to download a picture, edit it, and then once the editing is done, upload it back to the cloud. That's a great use for local data. We have local settings, and that's for the kind of things that, not all settings are things that I would want to roam. So let's say I have both my desktop PC, which is connected to my broadband cable modem, and then I have my tablet PC that has a 3G connection. I may decide if you built a video app that for the desktop PC, I want the highest quality you can give me. Give me the highest quality you can. I've got a really fast connection. I don't pay per megabyte, and so give me the best you can. But then for my slate, I may decide, you know what, I really want a lower quality That way I don't download too much, and because my network connection's slower, I won't have to wait as long or get as many network interruptions. So that's local data. For roaming data, there's a couple different scenarios you'd think about. We already talked about preferences. That's one scenario. The other one is really roaming the user's experience. And in the restaurant guide example, that was, I'm currently looking at Mario's restaurant. That's the restaurant I was currently dealing with, and I had just done a search on restaurants in the Anaheim area that were of type Chinese food or something. And so that kind of experience, small amount of data that you could easily move from machine to machine to machine through the cloud, that's the kind of stuff you should think about putting in roaming data. Roaming data has a limit right now in the release that you have, the way we've configured the system right now, you have a limit of 30K. So if you are trying to roam more than 30K of data, roaming will just stop working. We won't actually, as of right now, throw an error saying roaming has failed. But at the same time, there is a way for you to query and find out how much quota you have, and you can look at how much you're using and make sure that you're under your limits. And you're probably thinking, wow, 30K sounds pretty limiting. But it's really not. When we look at the scenarios and we really step back, we realize that for the kinds of apps that people are building, usually the information is either user data, like if I take a video or I take a picture of my daughter, that's user data, and that can be roamed separately. Or it was local cache, in which case that should really not be roamed or anything. Or it was these scenarios and these preferences. And so that limit could change later, but I would never expect it to get very, very large. So you shouldn't think about trying to use this roaming feature as a way for you to sort of build a cloud file system kind of roaming thing. There are features in live SkyDrive and there are talks on them. I'm not sure of the talk numbers. But if you are looking at storing larger amounts of data in the cloud sort of explicitly, you can look at those talks. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the continuity on a single PC. One question that people often have when we start talking about roaming data is they wonder whether it's accessible when you're not connected to the network. Right? If you're currently offline, you don't have any network connectivity, can I still access the roaming stuff? Is it a direct wire to the cloud or not? And the answer is no, it's not. Roaming, local, temp, they're all stored locally. The only difference between roaming and local is just the policy around whether our sync infrastructure will take the data, pick it up, and move it over to other systems. And so when you're accessing roaming data, you can do it without being too worried. So now we're going to attempt, and I use the word attempt very strongly. Actually, no, this first one's not bad. We're going to look at a little bit of code. So right here, what I have is I have a video app. And it's called Channel 9. And it lets me basically look at Channel 9 videos and pick the ones that I like and gives me a viewer to watch them. And I may or may not have picked this one as a little bit of a gratuitous, hey, look at me, I'm on Channel 9. But this is just a basic app right now. So it allows me to play videos. It really does just about everything that a regular app could do, or maybe even a website could do. It doesn't integrate into Windows in any way. So the thing that normally I'd want to be able to do is I would want to be able to configure this in some way. For example, if you added the roaming feature to this app, I might want to actually be able to configure whether you roam my experience or not. But when I go to the settings charm, right now you can see there's some default information about it, but there's nothing there. What we're going to do is we're going to go and add a preferences pane so the user can actually configure this app. And unlike yesterday, I'm not going to do much coding on stage here. So I'm going to just show you, though, what it takes to build a preferences pane. Win.js has this control that's the known settings command up preferences. Sorry, the control itself is the win.js.ui.settings pane control. It's just a div with a specific type on it, and as long as you initialize Win.js, it'll take that div and turn it into the proper control. And inside of that div, we let you just put standard HTML. And once you do this, and obviously you do the corresponding JavaScript to hook up the buttons that I've created, or I've actually created toggles. You'll see it in 1 second. Once you do that, you're done. So it's very, very simple for you to give an experience for your users for configuring your application. And so I'm going to go ahead and run this. And we'll see what the demo gods feel about that. I guess they thought it was OK so far. If I come out and go into settings, now I have this here, which says preferences. And if I click on it, you saw that that pane slid away, and now another pane slid out. This is all done by the Win.js control, that nice animation and everything, and keeping it off screen and hooking it up. That's all done by Win.js. So all you have to do now is deal with actually setting these buttons. So I could have something that enables it to cache offline. I have roaming. I have those kind of things. And so it's a really nice in-context way for a user to be able to configure your app. Other platforms have taken sort of including Windows, would take the control panel approach, where I'm actually in an app, and I want to change some setting on it. And I have to leave the app. I have to go out to some system UI. I have to pick some control panel thing. I have to drill down, find the app that I was just in, change some settings, go back out, go over, get back into the application before I can make the setting. And we just don't think that's right. We think that the right way to do it is to keep it in context. And so when I swipe out and I look at the settings pane, there it is. It's right there, and it's in the context of whatever app I'm in. There's also one other interesting thing that I'll mention here, which is there's this control system access for Channel 9 videos. In here, you can actually look and see any additional capabilities that the application has. And for ones that we've deemed that have privacy considerations, like access to the webcam or microphone, those kind of things, you could actually go in and revoke them. So even if before you had said, oh, this Channel 9 video thing can use my camera and my microphone, you may decide later you don't want that to be the case anymore. You can go in and turn those things off. All right, so let's go back to... Nailed it. All right. So I'll just talk a little bit about the guidelines for settings in Metro apps. They should always be available, so it really shouldn't be modal. If I'm using your app, no matter what page I'm in, I should really get the same settings experience. I should, as a user, I swipe out, there's all the settings that I wanted for your app. It shouldn't be that first I have to go into some part of your app, then go over, swipe out, and try to get at preferences. It should just be there. They should be simple and familiar commands. I shouldn't have to go to your website to read the help to figure out what flipping that switch is going to do. They're what we call light dismiss. If you noticed, I didn't have to hit some close button or anything. I swipe out, I can set the settings. The moment that I'm done with them, I tap somewhere else on the screen, and then they automatically dismiss. If you use the Win.js controls, or the equivalent ones that in like the XAML framework, then you'll get that behavior automatically. They're also instant commit. There's something that wasn't there on that screen when you looked. There was no save button. I didn't have to say, OK, yes, this is what I want it to be, and then say, yes, I really meant it. The moment that I flip the switch, the setting is now committed. If I want to go back, I can flip it again. And the last one is less is more. Lots of desktop applications have over time accumulated hundreds of settings. And one thing that we've learned is that there's so many and they're so hard to find that people aren't even aware that they exist. And so in a lot of cases, they might as well not exist. If a user doesn't know that you have some cool settings, so they never go there and they never set it, you might as well not have written the feature. And so you should really think about having a small number. Like we usually talk about it in the order of like 5 or 10 settings, not 50 or 100. So if you think about it that way, it should be, you should be able to provide a much simpler experience for your users. All right, so now let's talk about continuity across many PCs. This is really the big, powerful feature that we've done in Windows 8. With roaming, as we sort of said before, you just deal with local information, right? You deal with local data. You write to the file system, you write settings, and you sort of, at that point, your job is mostly done. We'll talk about a couple of corner cases that you should, or scenarios you should think about. But in general, the actual roaming part of it is taken care of for you. And the sync infrastructure behind the scenes of this feature is actually very, it has a lot of features. It's actually there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. It has to do things like conflict resolution, right? So what happens if a user has 2 machines and they change one setting here, they change one setting there, one of them is offline, later they come online, they go up, the data finally makes its way up into the cloud. How do you handle conflict resolution? The system does it for you automatically. It basically does last writer wins. And so it's a simple mechanism. It's easy for you to understand. And we provide some ways for you to make sure that works for you, but still you can still have consistency. And I'll talk about that in a second. It does other things. It provides the user the ability to control whether they want it to sync when they're on a costed network. And so that's something that you don't have to think about. Like there's system UI for that. There's just one simple setting. Users understand it. They don't have to understand how you decided to expose it. The system does it for you. It does things like it makes sure that it does stuff at a lower priority so that we don't, let's say if there was a lot of data being synced because you made some changes, other apps made changes, and everything was happening at once, we don't want the user's browsing experience to suffer. So it tries to make sure that there's some network idle there while it's doing the sync. It understands the user for you. This is a big one. You don't have to build a user management system. The user logs into Windows with their Live ID. The Live ID, or their Microsoft account, I think it's called. So they log in with their Microsoft account. And because we know that identity, and we can associate that with their SkyDrive storage, we handle the rest. So you don't have to worry about it. All you have to do is just write data. We figure out the right Microsoft account. We figure out the correct SkyDrive to sync to. We do all that work for you. So it's very powerful. There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. There is also a deep dive on this, either tomorrow or Friday. I'm speaking every day, so one of the next 2 days. I think it might be tomorrow. There's a deep dive on this, and we can go in deeper into all the things that go on there. So the one thing that you need to think about when it comes to roaming is about consistency. And I'll just give you an example. So let's say you built a mail client, and you allow the user to configure a mail account. And let's just say that the user goes in and on 2 different machines they configure a mail account that they name it default or whatever, and they happen to do it around the same time. And then if syncing happened, what if I got the username from one machine, the password from another, and now you'd have all this data that was just sort of jumbled and corrupt because really all of those separate settings really belong as a unit. And so for settings, we have this thing called a composite setting. And all it is, it's just a group of settings that are roamed as a unit. So if you think about that mail example, what you could do is you could create a composite setting that's their email account. And then inside of there, you could have a name, a password, a server. Maybe they had like download limits or whatever information you let them configure for that email account. You store that inside a composite setting. When you save it or when you commit it, it happens as a unit on that one system, and then it roams as a unit as well. And so that's pretty much all you have to think about when it comes to roaming, or these kind of corner cases of conflict resolution. File consistency is really simple. If you're going to have a roaming file, which there are cases where you want to store data in a file and roam it, while you have a handle to that file open, while you're interacting with a file and writing to it, we won't roam it. So that you don't have to worry about a case where you were writing out a bunch of information, you had only written half of it, then it got roamed to another machine, and on the other end, the code didn't understand because it was corrupt. We wait until you've let go and you stop using the file. And at that point, the file roams just like you'd think. It roams last writer wins. So if there was information that user had created on two different systems, whichever one they did last, that's the one that's going to win. So it's a very simple model, and we were very intentional about that. Trust me, we had tons of meetings about all kinds of different mechanisms that we could use to try to do consistency, and we try to derive intent and all kinds of fun stuff like that. But it turned out that the simple model just worked a lot better, and it's something that's very easy to understand and very easy to use. All right, so now I want to show you, I want to show you, we'll see if I'm actually going to be able to. Unfortunately for me, the network here, at least an hour ago, the network's pretty harsh. It hasn't been working as well as one would hope. And so, I'm going to give this a try and see what happens. Cheer me on, please. All right. So I'll show you the experience first, and then we'll go back and we'll look briefly at the code. So let's say I want to watch this video of Mark Rusinovich. So I go ahead and start watching it, and this one is a touchscreen, so I can actually do that. Sorry, let me. Yeah. All right. And so let's just say, just to speed things up here, let's say I've already seen part of this video, so I jump out to about 14 minutes, and now I go ahead and I have to go out somewhere. So I go and I pause the video and I leave that computer. I grab my tablet and I run out the door. What's happening behind the scenes is that the app wrote some information to the roaming area of app data. The sync infrastructure saw that information and actually decided to roam it to the cloud. Now, we're still working on what the right frequency of sync is, because we don't want to do it too often because it affects, it uses bandwidth, it uses even CPU, so it uses battery, it does all those kind of things. Right now in the build you have, it does it periodically, I forget the exact period, but it also picks logical times that sync is the right thing to do, like when I lock the screen. So it sees me lock the screen and says, okay, the user's not interacting with the system right now, and so anything that's kind of accumulated, we should get it up there and sync it. So it should get synced right over to the other computer, and then this is the part that gets fun. So I come over, and let's say I'm now in the coffee shop, and I have my Slate PC, and I decide that I want to continue watching Mark's video. What I'd like to be able to do is just launch it and have it come up, and the network here is a little bit slow, and there we go. It actually worked, no. All right. And so now I can literally just pick, see? This is not a touchscreen. God, every computer should have a touchscreen. I did not believe that. I did not believe Jensen. And now that I've been using, mine actually is not a touchscreen. This is the demo one that I've been using just for like the last few days. Totally, they should all be touchscreens. And there we go. So I can pick up where I left off. All right. Oh, actually, let's go back and look at the code a little bit. Code's always fun. Like I said, I'm really not going to write much code here. Touchscreen, nice. So let's switch out, and let's go in and look at the code. Oh, that's a snippet. All right. Get rid of that. Here we go. All right, so there's basically a couple of pieces of code. Before, when I was talking about the toggles, the actual code for saving the roaming settings is right there. So, for example, this variable is rather poorly named at roaming setting, but that's basically the should I roam the video, the thing that as I was checking the box. And you can see literally all I do is get the control and I just take whatever the state of the control is and just stick it right in the variable. That's all I did. That one line of code, now my preference for roaming will always roam across all the different computers. And then the interesting code for saving the video is actually right here. When we think about settings and we think about files, I said before that settings were about preferences. They were about the user explicitly configuring something and expecting that to last, a long period of time. Whereas the experience was something that obviously wasn't a setting. And so when you look at roaming the experience, we really expect you to roam the experience in a file. You're likely to have a bunch of data, like not just a few bools or ints or something, but you're likely to have potentially multiple pieces of information, like if for your restaurant app, you may keep track of the fact that I had done 5 searches, I was currently on this one, I had looked at 3, there's a back stack of restaurants that I had looked at. You might want to take all that information. You really shouldn't be grabbing large amounts of information and trying to stuff them in settings. One thing settings have for each individual setting is a rather small limit. The other thing about settings is that they automatically get loaded when you launch your app. And so if you try to stuff lots of information in settings, you actually will slow the launch of your app down. So you should really think about things like experiences being roamed in files. Luckily, dealing with files is pretty straightforward. In this particular case, I go and I create just a standard JavaScript object. And I take the information that I want to save and I put it in the JavaScript object. And then I turn around and I call JSON stringify, and then I use the WinJS application feature of roaming.writeText. It's really nice. It takes all the work of opening a file and doing async operations and stuff, and it turns it into a very very simple one line of code to do it. So with just this little bit of code, this will take the URL of the video that I'm currently watching and the current time. We'll store it in a file. And on the other side, I read the file out, and I make sure I actually got something. There's some other code in here that has nothing to do with that feature. But I just return I get the current video out, and I return it to the calling code, and then they do what they want with it. So it's very simple. And it's really powerful. Like if you think about that experience, the moment you start using apps that do that for you, the ones that don't will just feel broken. They'll feel antiquated. I should be able to go to any system or use your app on any system and be able to just continue where I left off. Right? People have already gotten used to this when they've started using websites as applications. Right? They can get back to the same sort of experience. They're not really that great at it today. Like every time I go back, if I go to like my social networking site, normally I go there, I end up back on page 1, and then I have to go off and drill through it. But any of the social networking apps, typically when I come back to them, they take me right where I was before, and it's a really nice feature, and it's something you should really think about. So there's a few other topics I want to cover here because they're very intimately tied to app data. One of them is connectivity and what you should do about it. You should expect that your app is not always going to be connected. 3Gs, more and more Slate PCs are starting to get 3G cards and all that. But even those, the network comes up, the network goes down, the network's really slow. So you should really think about your experience and how you can provide a really smooth, seamless experience for your users, even in the case of the network being unreliable, kind of like it is here today, as a matter of fact. I'm intimately aware right now of how unreliable networks can be. The place you want to store all of this information is in the local folder. So the local folder is underneath app data. So if you go to the application data object and you get the current, your application data object, there'll be a local folder there that's created for you. Put this kind of stuff there. It shouldn't roam. It's just there to give a user a much better experience. And the last topic I want to cover is always fresh. And so you're probably wondering what I mean by always fresh. I think you've probably seen either, actually, I know if you went to my talk yesterday, you saw this slide yesterday, and Alesh talked to it a little bit. I want to talk to you a little bit more about this scenario and what you should do about it. So when the user's interacting with your app, you get every pixel on the screen, and you get pretty much all of the CPU and resources on the system, minus whatever the OS has to use to keep the system running. Pardon me? But if the user switches away and decides to do something else, either they go to the desktop or they go to another Metro app, you're going to be suspended. There's a little bit of a lag there, so when you switch off the screen, you don't get suspended right away. But within a handful of seconds, your app's going to be notified that you're going to be suspended. You've then got 5 seconds to successfully suspend. If you don't, your app will be terminated in an unfriendly manner. We will just kill you. But even if you do successfully suspend, there's really 2 things that can happen at that point. If I, as your user of your restaurant guide, you're currently suspended, and I either go to the start screen and I tap on your tile again, or I swipe from the left and I come back to your app, you'll be resumed immediately. Because all suspension really is we stop scheduling your threads. Other than that, your app is still in memory. All the global variables are the same. Any local variables are the same. Like, your app is in kind of a freeze-dried state. But then sometimes we get low on memory. So let's say I switch away from the restaurant guide, and I go and launch Halo. Right? And I start playing Halo, and it's eating up lots of memory because the more memory it uses, the cooler experience it can give me. So I'm using a ton of memory playing some really great, interactive game. And the system decides that, it sees that the memory is getting low and it needs to free up some resources. Your app may get terminated. If your app does get terminated, you're not going to get notified again. You got the one shot when you were suspended, and we said, you're not going to be scheduled anymore. You may get resumed, you may get terminated, but we're not going to tell you again. We've had lots of internal developers say, but can't you just give me one more notification so I can do some more stuff? And the answer is no. It's actually a really bad idea because the system's currently in a low memory, in a low resource situation. So the last thing we should do is let your code run, so maybe you can allocate more memory, and you can make the system even slower, and therefore the user experience will suffer. So no, but by the time we make the determination to terminate your app, the last thing we'd want to do is let you run. So you're not going to get a notification. So what you should do? You're going to have to obviously handle suspension. And when you think about handling suspension, there's really a couple of different things. Ben's talk went really deep on this, so I'm only going to go over it briefly. But you should think about saving the user's experience. You should save what page I'm on. If I'm a newspaper app and I'm currently reading an article and I'm on page 3, you should save the fact that I'm reading that article and I'm on page 3. And maybe I'm scrolled halfway down the screen. You should remember the fact that I'm scrolled halfway down the screen. If I'm watching a video, you should keep track of what video I'm watching. You get the idea. And then you have to store that information somewhere. And the place that you're going to want to store it is, again, in the local folder. Right? So this is not preferences, so you shouldn't be trying to use settings for this. You really want to use the local folder for this. And luckily, the Win.js framework has a way that's really easy. There's win.js.application.sessionState. And all that is, it's just a standard JavaScript object. Any data that you stick in there will get automatically saved when suspend comes. You don't even have to register for suspend. It just happens. You store stuff in there, you can get it back out, and if suspension had happened and termination had happened in the middle, you don't care. It's like your persistent global variables, I guess you could think about it like that. One other thing that it does that's nice is The right answer isn't always to try to resume the last place that the user was. It usually is, but things happen. Your app might crash, for example. And if your app crashes, well, something's not right. And so rather than trying to restore, and maybe restoring the thing that caused you to crash last time, and therefore the user's in a continuous cycle of your app crashing, you should just say, OK, I crashed last time, and so therefore I should start clean. The user may have gone into Task Manager and just killed you. Maybe you didn't crash, but maybe you just were unresponsive, and the user just decided that they didn't want to deal with it anymore, and they killed your app. Maybe your app hung the UI thread, and then Windows killed you. There's lots of different reasons that you may get terminated, like I said, in an unfriendly manner. And if those happen, then you really shouldn't be restoring state. Luckily, you don't have to keep track of did I crash. There's no, you don't have to track a did I crash bit. Windows will tell you when you get activated what your previous execution state was. And basically, you can use that to know, it'll tell you whether you should start fresh or whether you should restore from where you were before. If you're using session state, you don't even have to think about that, because the Win.js session state object actually handles all that for you. It checks the previous execution state. It does everything for you. All you have to do is use it. As of right now, the XAML framework does not have the equivalent feature. But if you look in the samples, there's each one of them should have sample code for a thing called Suspension Manager. Ben talked about it earlier. There's a C# version and a C++ version. With that, you can basically use that class and get the same kind of behavior. You can also just do it on your own. And the one thing I want to stress again is that if you do it on your own, please, you should store that information in the local folder. Don't attempt to roam that. Don't attempt to store it in settings or anything. Use the local folder. It's the right place to do it. Your users will get the right behavior, and you as a developer will run into fewer problems. Like if that starts getting bigger than 30K and you were storing it in roaming because you thought maybe you'd try to roam it, it might not work for you. So I'm just wrapping up. Good. Just a review. The key thing you should take away from here is that Windows 8 lets you create these really, really great experiences for your users. So take advantage of them. Go out, go look at the samples, go look at the code, and use these to come up with great experiences for your users, both across PCs as well as as the user interacts between your app and other applications. And really consider delivering an offline experience. Really think about connectivity. You see apps today on phones that haven't thought about that, and it very quickly gets irritating. Even though a phone's often connected, phones have the same 3G issues where sometimes the network's not there. Think about it and make sure that you take this into consideration and you leverage app data to build that great experience. And finally, please don't ignore suspension and termination. If you do, your app will get amnesia, and users will not like you, and they will probably uninstall your app. And luckily, Windows 8 will clean all your stuff up, but you will have just lost a customer. If you want to know more, I'm having a Chalk Talk. I think it's tomorrow. Look in the schedule. If it's not tomorrow, then it's Friday. I have a couple more talks. It's one of those. I'll go deeper into how the roaming works. And also, since it's a Chalk Talk, you'll be able to ask lots of questions and stuff. Here are the related sessions. I'll just let you read those. Some of them actually, the second one just happened in this room just before. So if you missed any of these sessions, remember that you can always go to the session and either on Channel 9 or actually with those great tablets we gave you, which, by the way, I don't even have one, so I'm really jealous. You can use the build app that's in there, and within usually 24 hours, it should be posted, and you can go into the session page and actually hit play. And there's also some more further reading and documentation. So that's it. I hope the information was useful, and go off and build great apps.